And I ask myself, why do we behave so foolishly in the face of powerful data, in the face of knowing what's right, especially what's right for women? What are the binding constraints? Now, here is a certain reality. Women own 1% of world's wealth. Women have 10% share in global income. Women occupy 14% of leadership positions in the private and public sectors. Women account for 70% of the world's poor. And here's another reality. Women face persistent discrimination when they apply for credit, for business, or self-employment. Women are concentrated in insecure, unsafe, and low-wage work. They're often paid less for the same work done. On average, in 2008, statistics show a 17% gap between men and women, wage gap. Women remain prone to poverty because they face systemic discrimination in education, health care, employment, and property ownership. And you know, being poor also means that you have little protection from violence and you have little role in decision making. A finding by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean show that women in Latin America and the Caribbean have a greater share of the workload than men, and they spend more time performing unpaid domestic and care work. In fact, Women's Learning Partnership has done a very interesting study, which shifts the discussion in another direction. I said when you invest in women, good things happen. So Women's Learning Partnership estimates that for every year beyond 4th grade that girls attend school, a country's wages rise by 20%, and child mortality rate dips by 10%. When the average education level of a country's adult female population increases by 1 year, the share of women in the workforce increases by nearly 1%. And many studies show that companies with more women on their boards do better financially than those with a few. Recent McKinsey survey determined that of companies who had made efforts to empower women in emerging markets, 34% reported increased profits. Another 38% said that they expected to see profits as a direct result of those efforts. The World Economic Forum estimates that closing the employment gap, gender gap in the US would increase US GDP by 9%. In BRIC countries, as Brazil, Russia, India, China, as well as in the N11, the Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Iraq, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, South Korea, Turkey, and Vietnam, the Center for Work-Life Policy estimates that utilizing women could push per capita income up by 14% by 2020 and 20% by 2030. But you know what I find really, really interesting? That in spite of all the data, challenges remain for women. In developing countries, the social effects of female economic empowerment are particularly evident. Women invest 90% of their income into community and family, compared to 30 to 40% invested by men. So my question is, why aren't we doing something to empower women? If the gains to the economy are so clear, if the studies show what will happen in a measurable way, why aren't we doing what needs to be done? Now, looking from a government perspective, I ask the question, what then should governments do? What is their role in empowering women? And I'm just going to leave you with food for thought, and then we will pick up in the discussion. We have to secure women's rights. We have to secure them legally. We have to pass laws that ensure equal pay for equal work for all jurisdictions that do not have it. That is something we must target and seek to achieve. We must look at maternity with leave pay, maternity leave pay. Because women are discriminated because they bear children and sometimes are cycled in a prejudicial way out of the workforce. We must ensure that there is a legal framework which enables women to hold property in their own right, because that is important for collateralization. We must also look at the rights of spouses when that delicate institution of marriage breaks up. We must look at our sexual offenses. We must protect our women from violence. So, if empowering women means powering trade, then we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that quantitative analysis of why investing in women is an economic imperative because of the multiplier effects. Next, we have the Development Commissioner Lal from the Ministry of Micro, Small, Medium Enterprises in India. He also is a true champion looking at widespread federal policy that could have a very significant positive impact on women's economic empowerment and opportunity. And it's my great pleasure to invite you to please share your experience with us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'll straight away start from where the Minister for Jamaica left this topic, and also recall some of the things which were presented beautifully in the framework for future international trade in the opening session of this conference. In the opening session, Professor Gemawat had mentioned the huge scope that exists for furthering the expansion of trade. I think that point was beautifully made, that the possibilities are much more than we individually perceive. Another point which emerged was the entire issue about performance of trade in terms of value versus volumes. A third point, which was made by Mr. Bhatia, was about the sustainability of trade growth in the context of inclusiveness of growth strategies. And I think today's subject, which we are discussing over here, is very relevant to all these three strategic issues which were outlined over there. In this context, we discuss seldom the role of the micro and small enterprises in world trade, and specifically within the micro and small segment of enterprises, the role of women enterprises. I'd like to present some data from India to just flag this issue. As I was mentioning in another session yesterday, we have conducted a census of the small and medium enterprises in India. In fact, we do this every 5 years. And the latest that was done was in 2006 with the base year 2006. We found that the MSCs contribute nearly 8% of the GDP in India. There are 26 million micro, small and medium enterprises employing 60 million people. They contribute 40% of the manufacturing output and nearly 35% of the exports of this country, directly or indirectly. Now, when it comes to women enterprises, there are 2.1 million of them, constituting about 8.2% of the total number of micro and small enterprises. But interestingly, they employ 10.9 million people, which represents about 18% of the employment in the micro and small enterprises sector. So the point I'm trying to make, the first point is that on the whole, we all know that the micro and small enterprises, they are highly employment intensive, and therefore they contribute towards the inclusiveness and equity in growth. But within that sector, we have a segment which is contributing almost double to the employment compared to the other micro small enterprises, and therefore contributes even more to the inclusiveness and growth of the overall economy and the dispersal of benefits, which was a point which was also made by the minister from Jamaica. So the importance of such enterprises, the micro enterprises in general, the importance of women enterprises, I think needs no further argument. Now, when we look at the sector, we find that in India there's been an almost 80% increase in the number of women enterprises over the last 5 years. This is a substantial increase. Partly it may be attributed towards the data not having been adequately captured earlier, but even so, the margin is too much, and I think one can safely conclude that the number of enterprises being run by women is increasing. So there is a need at the international and national level to recognize this role, to identify the measures which have led to such growth, and to identify the specific needs of this sector to contribute more towards trade and vice versa. When we look at the areas where the women enterprises are mostly working, we find that there are a few sectors where traditionally women enterprises have been very strong. The agro and food processing industry, there are a very large number of enterprises being run by the women. Textiles and garments, gems and jewelry, these have been the traditional sectors where the women enterprises have been working. Lately, women enterprises have come up in the IT and IT-enabled services, in health products and herbal products, biotechnology, and eco-friendly technologies. When we look at the sector as a whole, we find, however, that the women-run enterprises, typically, they are at the lower end of the production chain, of the various tiers of suppliers. Also, the enterprises, being large in number, they are scattered geographically. They suffer from lack of information. And as I mentioned, they also are confined to a few sectors. So what are the main challenges if we look at women enterprises in the context of national and international trade? I think one of the main challenges which emerges is about information asymmetries and how to address that issue. Another challenge is about encouraging such enterprises to moving up the value chain. A third challenge is to assist the enterprises in whatever way possible for expansion and growth. Now, there are certain things which the governments and international bodies can do, but I think that there is a role, and a very important role, for the non-government